This is Space Minds by SpaceNews. In this episode of Space Minds, host Mike Gruss moderates a timely panel discussion at the Spacepower conference on how commercial space capabilities are reshaping national security, civil space, and military decision-making. Joined by Luke Fischer, CEO and co-founder, SkyFi, Bob Pavelko, Executive Director, National Security Space Programs, Intuitive Machines, and Bradley Cheetham, CEO and co-founder, Advanced Space. The conversation explores what speed really means in today's space environment and why delivering usable capability now often matters more than waiting for perfect solutions later. But first, a word from our sponsor, InnoFlight.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Gruss with SpaceNews. We have a great panel here today, as you just heard, on the evolving space environment and dual-use innovation. So let's face it, every speaker at this conference is going to talk about speed, right? We have more satellites launching every week. We have seen several launch records already fall this year. We have commercial technology now where leaders and government officials are saying it outpaces traditional military innovation and acquisition cycles. And there are adversaries that are moving particularly quickly. You've seen who the panelists are today, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their company. But I want to, as you do that, I'd like you to also explain what are some of the traits that make for that a company should have to succeed in the national security space. So, Luke, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I'm Luke Fischer, CEO and co-founder of SkyFi. SkyFi is an Earth intelligence company, so we deliver geospatial imagery and analytics to government customers all over the world, commercial customers all over the world through a web and mobile application. My background, I spent 20 years in the Army, 16 years active duty, most of that time in the special operations realm. Then went out, worked for Uber, venture capital before co-founding SkyFi about 4 years ago. When I think about the traits that make companies successful and what we really strive to do at SkyFi, yes, about speed, but it's about speed of information to the warfighters, to the intelligence community, to the commercial customers overall. Because that's what I think over the last decades we've been focused on. Can we put metal in space? Can we launch a rocket? That is now solved. Now it's about what do the customers want? And what we've seen is there's a little bit too much science focus still within these companies, within the bureaucratic agencies that are some of the gatekeepers of this imagery, where the warfighters don't care, the intelligence professionals don't care. They just want the thing as fast as possible. And that's where I think if we fast forward another year, come back here, we're successful if everyone knows how to task a satellite very quickly, get the analytics to apply their business decision, government problem to get those solutions. So that's what I think about speed. Not speed to launch, who cares? It's about speed of information to the end users.
Can you elaborate on there's still too much science there? What does that mean?
Yeah, when a lot of geospatial companies are founded by geospatial experts. So they go with their bias of what they need to know. They're like, let's tell the customer about the pixels and the revisit rate and how long our satellites can last. No customer cares about that. They want to know, can I detect a vessel? Can I detect an oil and gas leak? Can I detect a military formation that's moving or change over time? So that's what we think about the most outside of the science. Because again, it'd be like if you order an Uber and they're like, well, it has 4 wheels and it's a 4-cylinder and it's got 5 seatbelts in the back. Like, I don't care. Can it get me from point A to point B? So that's what I mean.
All right. How many water bottles are in the back?
Exactly.
All right. Brad, how about you? What are some of those traits that you think a company needs to succeed?
Sure, yeah, thanks. So Brad Cheetham, co-founder, CEO, Advanced Space. We are a non-traditional company based in Denver, Colorado. We're best known as the owners and operators of the Capstone spacecraft, which has been flying at the moon for over 3 years. Totally mission success, and we're in our 3rd extended mission. We're also the prime contractors on a program called Oracle out of AFRL doing space surveillance of the cislunar regime. And we do a lot in supporting software tools and solutions for analysis at scale for things like SSA data here on the ground, as well as other processing. And so, and we're also really proud to be supporting NASA and the Artemis program with a lot of great stuff that they're doing on the civil and human spaceflight side. So really, I think what does it take to be successful in what we're talking about here, and what we are seeing for our customers is we need to deliver capability. What I think a lot of times people get enamored by is the concepts and the PowerPoints and what the future generations of their systems or their capabilities can do. But what we see when we're interfacing is that we need to deliver capabilities, in this context, to the warfighter or to our civilian leaders or to our commercial partners, and they need to be able to answer the mail on a challenge that they have. And so what we see is really the speed theme for us is really, I think, kind of contextualized in a sense of urgency, because the need for those capabilities is now, or it was yesterday, and we're still developing it. So for us, it's really a focus on delivering capabilities. Yes, we always can make it better. I think kind of a little bit to what you're talking about, the science thing, right? Like there's always better, but right now in a lot of areas, we don't have any capabilities, or we have very limited capabilities. And so what we see is a need to deliver things, and they need to work. We can't, as industry, expect that we can deliver, less than excellent capabilities to our warfighters and to our government customers. So our job is to bring what they need, and we need to bring it, I think, with a sense of urgency to meet the national needs.
And that's part of a discussion that I think has kind of evolved over the last 5 or 10 years, right? That it doesn't have to be a perfect solution, but it also can't be a crappy solution. Like there's a wide spectrum there, but they're still looking for a very narrow piece of what success looks like.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have these are not like theoretical needs anymore. I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago we talked about a lot of this stuff like, well, someday it would be nice to have commercial this or commercial that. Almost as I think, if we rewinded ourselves back then, it was almost like as an augmentation, or as like, that's cute, industry thinks they can do X, Y, and Z. But I think the reality is that now in a lot of these areas, we don't have the luxury of that, theoretical world. It is a today need. It is a real need. And I think as an industry, as industry is providing those capabilities, it is our responsibility to bring that, because it's not just like a throwaway commercial budget line anymore where, it used to be like, hey, look, someone said commercial was important, so we threw a little bit of change at it. Now it's like, these are the no kidding capabilities that are needed. And we have to bring that, whole of nation, I think has come up a couple of times. It's a whole of nation requirement now. And that means, Title 10, Title 50, NASA's in Title 51. That means industry, that means academia, that means all of this is required. It's not a nice to have anymore, it's a need to have.
Sponge, how about you? Where do you see the success for companies that or the traits for success among the companies that are working well with Space Force?
No, I appreciate it. Happy to be here today. Bob Pavelko from Intuitive Machines, a little company down in Houston, Texas, opening up cislunar access, but so much more than that. Logistics, infrastructure, to be able to work and provide capabilities from space, whether it's transportation, whether it's data, all those things kind of packaged together. And where I see, Brad kind of hit on it a little bit, is, perfect's the enemy of good enough. What can I have today? What can I have tomorrow? And then let's think about even further down the road, but don't make that perfection get in the way of getting something out right now. A minimum viable product or something that's good enough right now, a capability or even data is going to be intrinsically valuable to the warfighter right now, or to a commercial entity or to civil space. And sometimes those all hit together. That Venn diagram, perfection's in the middle, but there are niche requirements that each one of those customers is going to want. And so I see going fast with something that's valuable. And sometimes having that today, tomorrow, is much more valuable at the 70% level than even 80, 90% level next week, next month, next decade.
Have you seen that mindset change where people are willing to accept that 70% solution? Because, if saying it here, you're like, 70%, that's a C-, like that's maybe not good enough. But like, are there people who are saying like, no, that it's better than zero?
Absolutely, but I think it's got to be done in a way that kind of fits in. We've all heard acquisition reform. I mean, that drum's been beaten every day, every year. You know, Secretary just came out with it again, right? I get it. But create those requirements, right? Because that's what we have to deliver to in a stepwise function that builds up to that. So a minimum viable product or something that's here, call that 70%. Hey, if you've got that on orbit or you can have that data delivered quickly, that's good enough today. Then let's figure out the lessons learned to tweak that. How do we make it better? Where did we miss the mark? And then continually improve that. I mean, the Model T Ford was not perfection, you know, when Henry sent it off the line with item number 1. It got tweaked and got better, and now look at we are now. You've got a Ford Lightning, you know, F-150 that's awesome. He was not going to make that even in his lifetime, in his wildest dreams. But it moved along. So, I mean, that's a pedantic type example, but set the expectations jointly with your customers and then push it out.
I'll open this up to anyone to go first, but I think when we're talking about dual-use technology, and there's plenty of areas, imaging, robotics, comms, what's one area that the commercial sector is now moving faster than government, or you're seeing innovation move faster than government? Luke?
Yeah, I'll jump in first. So, you know, our aspect, we focus a lot on Earth observation, you know, the SAR imagery, electro-optical, hyperspectral, everything in between. Where we see is, you know, that commercial imagery sector is in a lot of aspects outpacing government capabilities, where it means can a warfighter, can an intelligence professional get information to determine, you know, what their mission's going to be or make a business decision. You know, it's because of the launch cadence, because of Elon Musk and SpaceX. You know, getting to space now is, and I say this kind of flippantly, not hard. It is, you know, it's all relative. Where, you know, I look at what we built at SkyFi, and I say it all the time, my teenage daughters can task a satellite while they're eating their breakfast in the morning, but soldiers in the battlefield cannot, and that is a fundamental problem. And it's because I think what you were saying earlier is, you know, everyone complains about the government acquisition, but it is getting better. And it's about risk tolerance. And I think it's very simple, where the government can take lessons much more from the venture capital side of the house, where a portfolio director or you know, somebody that's in charge of, you know, acquisition reform, it's very simple. It's a human problem. They don't want to say, you know, I gave out money to these companies and 3 of them failed, you know, because they want to get evaluated on the good decisions they make. Well, in the venture capital world, VCs know 70% of the companies they fund are going to fail, and they're fine with that, because if you have 1 or 2, 3 successes, that outweighs that. And I don't think that mindset has transitioned over enough to accept risk, with exceptions. Like if you're putting humans in space, that has to work 100% of the time. So, you know, that's where I see this commercial world vastly outpacing it. I mean, look at, you know, companies like Umbra and ICEYE and Planet and Vantor and their capabilities, where you have the NGA and NRO back in the day culturally were really set on these bespoke billion-dollar assets that needed, you know, expert control to make sure it got to the users. Well, now that's gone. Like, there's so many satellites in space, anyone can access it all over the world, but the military is still in this bureaucratic cycle trying to figure out how to culturally change that gatekeeping of imagery, which is a real thing, and we hear it all the time.
Brad or
Yeah, I'd say, I think, you know, one of the things I think where industry, and I'll say especially kind of some of the innovation threads that you're laying out there, I think industry is really great at experimentation. And I think some of it is this failure acceptance, and I was hoping we were going to get to argue about it, but then you added your caveat at the end that, you know, you can't be failing everywhere. But I think that is partly what I think the role and the benefit of industry in a lot of these architectures can be, right? As small companies, as new companies, as venture-backed, we happen to be privately held, but we can take risks. Like, we can bet the company on new things, and if it works, it's great. And if it doesn't work, we have to go find new jobs, right? We don't want, I don't think, very many parts of our government like betting the company on capabilities, right? And so I think this is where there's an opportunity for industry from a dual-use perspective to take a lot of higher risks, to try new things. And then I think the key, though, and this kind of gets at your point earlier, the key, though, is that when we then demonstrate that the experiment was successful, we have to figure out how to get that wrapped in to, you know, our architectures for warfighting, or our architectures for how the government operates. And I think that's the challenge, is that we have to have that upside, maybe not necessarily venture capital upside, but that upside of the benefit of having what we have in the United States is the best space industry in the world, you know, full stop. that can be brought to bear to a lot of these challenges, but when industry is experimenting and figuring things out and finding successes, we have to get those inside the operational loops in less than, a 10-year budget cycle, right? A lot of the companies, we started 14 years ago, but a lot of companies we've seen in that time period have solved problems maybe before the needs were really known by the government. The government couldn't figure out how to buy them, and then they go away, right? And so I think that's the challenge, is matching the urgency of I need to make payroll with the urgency of I need to, deter conflict in space, and put those two together. I think we can do great things. Like we've seen on our Capstone spacecraft, which has been operating at the moon now for 3 years, we have used that as a platform from a commercial services and a commercial data perspective to provide capabilities to the U.S. government that they did not have to then go launch a new system to do. We were able to mature technologies and test things out. We need more of that. We need more of that ability for the government to buy capabilities that have already been proven versus having to have the government be underwriting all of the risk-taking and all of the experimentation.
How fast do you want that ability to buy then? Like, is it, hey, we demonstrated this in the next year or 2 years? Like, what does ideal look like?
That sounds like a dangerous question. So I think
at breakfast with Luke's daughters.
Well, I'll say not to do too much arguing, but it's at the speed of the need. And I think right now, if there's a problem that the Space Force has, that there's a commercial solution to that already exists, I don't know why that has to take more than a day, maybe a week. But just call them and say, hey, here's what we need, here's what we have. Problem solved. Like we had some development issues with our Capstone mission several years ago, and I literally picked up the phone and called the vendor and said, hey, the incumbent I'm having an issue with, can you do better? And he said, yeah, give me 3 weeks. Now, it happened to just be over December, Christmas break, and all the government people who probably wanted to review that decision were on end-of-year leave, so maybe we need to take more vacations. But the point is, I think we got to get to that point where it doesn't need to take that long. Yeah. We create all this, legal hoops and all these other things. It doesn't need to take that long.
Bob.
I think Luke and Brad kind of hit on it, but that combination of taking smart risk, taking investments and putting it in the right place, and then trying to go fast is kind of what we're all leading to. What I also think is part and parcel to that is, I'll say, the opportunity to take a knee and think for a minute. Sometimes the government or customers are so focused on their problem, it gets myopic that, hey, this is my solution, they've already come up with it, and sometimes not open enough to consider alternatives, or when something is brought to them, hey, here's how this issue problem can be addressed, here how it can be done differently, faster, quicker, whatever. The opportunity for this side of the ledger, for commercial entities, as I said, sometimes take a knee and think about it, or look at that problem in a different way. Combining then what Luke and Brad hit on of, the investment in the right places, the risk, with the right, balance, and then going fast to be able to go ahead and jump in and move out with that.
I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here, though, which is, I think when we hear about the Secretary talk about acquisition reform, or you hear folks in the Space Force talk about acquisition reform, everyone says, hey, we're heading in the right direction. We're moving at speeds that we couldn't move at years ago. So, and I think there's an acknowledgement that folks are moving faster. But what still is that challenge to getting the innovation they need then, even if they're taking the steps, albeit baby steps, in the right direction?
Yeah, I think it's a lot on the people, where the military, being an Army guy, what do? You're in a role for 2 to 3 years and you move out. Somebody comes in and says, hey, here's my priorities, because everyone wants to leave their mark. And I'll say I give credit to the Space Force and their mindset of being commercial first. Buying those solutions from the commercial industry, I think is vitally important. But I think ultimately, industry ends up having a little whiplash, especially for a company that's been around for 14 years, you've seen, probably dozens of government, reps or portfolio owners, and everyone has their little different twist, and things can change very dramatically. And there's always that lag time too, where, okay, hey, I'm transitioning, I've got a PCS to my new role, here's the new 05 or 06 that's gonna be in charge of it. They come in, it takes months to get up to speed, and then here you are with the company going I need to make payroll. Is my contract going to hit or not? And that's part of the problem. I can't even remember the question you asked. But anyways, hopefully that was the right point. No. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll just play it. I think it's about people, and I think the key is, and we heard about this a bit this morning, I think the key is giving people the authority consistent with what you're going to hold them accountable to. And I think this is a big challenge when, in kind of the idea of like, make sure you're solving the right problem. It's like, really, we need these people to own the capability that needs to be fielded. That's not owning necessarily a force design or a requirement set. It is owning a need and then figuring out how to get it.
So
and I think
it becomes a management issue for
well, I
the
think
Space Force.
I think the Space Force has
or an accountability
right.
management.
Well, I think it's
issue.
about giving its accountability, but authority is I think the other key piece, right? Is I think if you put the Space Force has, I think, the right people. Their Guardians have the capabilities here, but it's a question of like what parameters are you bounding them by, right? Like if you say like, hey, here's the need. Here's the credit card, here's your budget, go solve it, right? Instead of spending a decade doing all this stuff that misses technology evolution, misses commercial solutions that could be in the trade space, and then you end up having the answer and you give it to some poor person at the end who has to go execute on is not necessarily their plan, it's not necessarily the best plan, but it's the one that they're told to do. And they will do it, and they'll do the best of their ability. But I think if you really give them the authority, like we heard about this morning, to go get at the solutions they need, I think that gives us that flexibility. When there's a person who can say, here's what I need, and someone who can say, here's what I can do, and they are able to move.
There's no fear of getting their hands slapped for doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, and embracing that risk of failure. Like at the end of that report, going, because everyone does it. I've done it, for your officer evaluation report. Here's all the awesome stuff I did. But then going like, that's great. Tell me what you failed at. Tell me what big bet you made that you failed at. And accepting failure as part of the job. And we're, when I say we, but as like the military, we're so used to like, I don't fail because I just can't in my job. But it's a cultural mindset where you have to embrace failure and accept it, at some points.
And Luke, you hit exactly where I was going to go. Is we talked about the authority, the responsibility, but the leeway to fail. But more importantly, those lessons learned. How are we going to make it different moving forward? Anybody that's run a test, I would argue that we learn more when that test doesn't go right, when we fail, because then you deeply crawl into what happened. The infrastructure, the process. What were we testing for objectives, and why didn't it go right? Versus, hey, we checked everything and it was green. Okay, next. I would argue that's probably the wrong way to walk through your testing regime, is even when it went like you thought it would, you probably need to dig deeper. But we do that when there's failures. Then the individual that took that calculated risk and that bet, especially with a military mindset, holding them responsible. Hey, you didn't meet all the marks. You get an F-, in the back of the truck. No, I would argue that based on their portfolio, what their capability they were trying to deliver to the warfighter, was that a logical bet? Was that a sound bet? And okay, that one didn't work, but move on. And then balance that with we've all heard the mantra, buy what you can, build what you must, right? To that bespoke end is, what does the commercial ecosystem have available? Start there, and then continue to tweak and evolve till you get to something that you absolutely need, because there is a lot of overlap that's already existing.
One of the other challenges that we hear a lot about is, particularly with commercial data sets and the data that's generated by commercial companies, but then also has civil users or national security users or commercial users. So how do you balance that? And I don't know if standards is maybe the right word, but what needs to exist so that I guess maybe it's firewalled properly, but also that the national security users get what they need, and there's also classification issues with all of this. It's a really complicated problem, but how are you all thinking about commercial data here? Brad, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, I'll start. I think I'll go back to what I said a minute ago. I think if you put all of this in the context of a whole-of-nation priority, which is to say, like, we are all on the same team, like whether whatever suit you're wearing or whatever agency or title you work for, this is a team sport and we all need to figure it out. I think if you start there, a lot of those challenges that you mentioned, classification levels or, how many significant digits are in your data set or whatever, a lot of those they're still important, but I feel like they're less driving the conversation. I think what we, and I think this is an evolution that we're in the midst of right now, but I think historically in an era where we didn't have a pacing threat, we could have a civil space solution, a DoD solution, an Intel solution, and a commercial solution, and they could all be different and they could all be special. I don't think we have that luxury anymore, right? And so I think as we look at the urgency and the need of a whole-of-nation collaboration approach, yes, some people are going to get underserved, some people are going to get overserved, but I think we're at a situation where we don't have the luxury of everybody doing their own perfect thing all the time. And so it's really, I think the biggest evolution right now is it's just we have to get to a level of acceptance that the big picture here is what we're all working towards, and that as we work towards that, we're going to have to make compromises.
And that's a change that comes within corporate structures then, too.
It's everybody. I think it's companies. I mean, like, organizations are built, with, national security division and civil division and commercial division, right? Like, those all need to be working together.
Very title, right?
They all need to be working together. Just like in the government, we need to be seeing the same thing. And so I think this is where we're going through an evolution here. And I think, when we get back to this similar topic next year, I think we'll start to see an evolution in how that looks.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, absolutely agree. I mean, the language is nuanced for different customers, but sometimes the product that they're getting is almost exactly the same. And absolutely agree, for a whole nation to pull that forward, let's not create 3-4 different solutions. They're all going to be overlapping and get it there as quickly as possible. You did mention, though, the classification hurdle, for lack of a better term. I mean, national security space, we've always had that, almost creating that problem on our own. And having to overcome it. But that data for a national security space customer may be available for a commercial customer, and it's the exact same thing, although the commercial customer is not going to classify it. There are some bespoke IC type capabilities. I get it. They have to be kind of, softened around the edges, so to speak, if you're gonna use those commercially. But there's a tremendous overlap.
Are those classification challenges easing? I mean, I think, again, like talking about speed, every year we hear, we're gonna make classification easier for a lot of these data products. Is that happening?
It's policy, it's not physics. So the laws of physics can, you can't ignore them. Policy can be changed. So you just have to get to the right person with the right authority, and policy can be altered. So they're making progress. We are making progress, as a nation to do that. I mean, we even mentioned Title 10, Title 50, Title 51. Even trying to have conversations at a classified level across there is cumbersome, and we get in our own way, the government, when we play with them, and even amongst themselves. Again, it's just policy.
Yeah, and we, for SkyFi, we're focused on Earth observation, delivering commercial imagery to customers, both government and commercial all over the world. We get that question a lot from customers going like, can I really task a satellite and get an image of Pyongyang? And we're like, absolutely, you can do it with a couple button presses. So that's the beauty of our platform, where again, back to an earlier point, where the commercial world is in some levels outpacing government capabilities. But for us, it's very easy when we're built on APIs and algorithms, and a team that came from Uber, where we understand product and scalability, where it's very solvable, where we've got our public-facing platform where anyone can use it. But then we build these bespoke and more exquisite platforms for the Space Force, for Taiwan MND and SOCOM, where again there's a different level of speed, rightfully so. So how do we determine, does a energy customer based out of Houston have priority over a tier 1 special missions unit? And the answer is no, and they shouldn't have that. So it's all for us software based. We have that luxury of, again, we're not hardware. Thankfully, I think at some levels where software has its own challenges, but there's multiple ways to do it now. And I think where, again, on the cultural side too, the government is so used to this classified imagery and who controls it and what's the chain of custody, where that has kind of gone now in some levels, where you should have a platform that integrates all the government capabilities, all the commercial capabilities, because that's what warfighters actually need, but there's still this bifurcated system and classified systems where they don't talk to each other. So it becomes very painful for analysts and end users to go get commercial data from one platform, switch systems, log in, go get something else from the classified system to ultimately build a solution for a warfighter that is sitting in Somalia waiting for information. And so it gets all back to that speed and risk assessment of classified versus unclassified, but like how do you solve that? And it's software defined, very easy to do, but now it's a policy decision of like who's making that decision to unburden that chain.
And when you're setting those priorities, saying, hey, which user might get first dibs at this material, I mean, it sounds like in many cases, the Space Force, for this audience, would get that. But
first dibs.
Are there examples where you can say, hey, we can see where we're working on this product or we're working on this capability for a national security purpose, but we see a science purpose here, or we see a civil use as well, because I think what we've heard a lot about from the last year or two is civil companies saying, hey, we think there's a defense application to what we do. I'm not as aware of companies going the other way, where with defense companies saying like, hey, I think this might be of interest to NASA or ESA or someone else. How do you see that working from a science perspective or just a commercial perspective?
Yeah, what we're seeing in real live as of like days ago, we built products. We've got a contract with DIU for the Space Force, and we built change detection models, which are great, and they've got government capabilities, and we're like, we've got commercial customers like, I would like this capability, so we go to the government customer and be like, you've subsidized this work for the commercial world. And that is what is beautiful. That is where the true dual use aspect of companies that understand how to serve both sides of the equation with a similar product allows it to scale very easily. So we see that time and time again, and that is what, again, DIU, that's what's great, because the higher probability of success comes from dual-use companies, where if you're just defense, you're going to wait in the budget cycles and all the contracting. Commercial enterprise customers, arguably, very hard to sell to as well. But if you have that dual-use capability where you're building for one and the other one use it, that creates valuable companies. And what does that mean? That those end users on both sides get better products overall for it. If that answers it.
I'll just add two pieces on that. I think from the first part of your question is, how do technologies transition kind of from national security out? I think holistically, something like GPS is a great example of a capability that was built for a very specific national security need and is absolutely employed, obviously not just to figure out how to get an Uber, but also for scientific purposes of measuring the atmosphere and other key things. So I think there's one key there. I think the other one is sort of space safety as a term, or the work that is being done to track and monitor what's going on in space, which absolutely for all users of space care about whether we're going to have conjunctions and how we do that management. Obviously, that's transitioning over to the Department of Commerce, but there is still a legacy, I think, of that national security piece. It's important. But the other thread I wanted to just touch on, I think, is kind of, there was implied in your question is sort of can civil and commercial folks throw solutions over the fence to DoD, and I think it's an important topic in the context of dual use, is that
I'd say and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think it's the challenge, particularly as you talk about like security levels and other stuff, is that going back to one of the things I mentioned earlier, is that the needs are real. Like, these aren't like esoteric, maybe someday we'd like this capability. And I think the challenge a lot of times industry has is if we as industry don't really understand the need and really understand the priorities of the warfighter in this case, then yeah, we have something that I would love for someone to buy, but it's not their priority. It doesn't actually meet their need. And a lot of times I think from an industry perspective, like, we need to try a little bit harder to get into there and really understand, kind of to the point, Luke, you were making earlier, that we're solving the actual problem. Like, I don't care how many seatbelts are in the back of the Uber, I just need to get to the airport. And I think a lot of times industry trying to pitch things over the fence to the DoD, DOW, is basically like, I got a new seatbelt. And they're like, cool, we don't really care about the seatbelts, right? And so I think I think it's an observation for industry. We have to really appreciate that these are real needs and that we have to understand them. And it can't just be, to make my fundraising deck look better, I put the Department of War as a customer and they're going to give me a bunch of money someday. We got to really understand what that need is for the Guardians that we're solving. We spend a lot of time on that.
And just to add to, somebody on the last panel, or I think as a question was asked, a lot of people don't know about the Space Force was what a Guardian said. Like, that similar thing, a lot of commercial customers and Department of War customers don't know about the capabilities. So there has to be the education and the awareness, because people don't know capabilities of, for example, hyperspectral satellites and what you can do for mineral detection and everything else out there. So, very similar, there has to be this education. You have to make the bet. You have to get out there on the various socials and webinars and platforms like this to be like, here's what is out there. Because as industry, I take it as our job to inform customers, because this is, everything each of our companies is focused on. That's all we're focused on. But again, the grander audience doesn't know. So how do you get that message out there and the capabilities? Because again, that speeds up that innovation cycle.
And Mike, you mentioned it, where would we like to be in a year from now? What do we envision? And I think to tie together, what we just hit on, especially Luke, is the reverse industry days, right? You got to find, there's a customer out there that's probably interested in extra seatbelts, maybe. How do you find that person, right? You can spend every waking hour of every day for years and trying to find that person that wants the extra better seatbelt. But the government has been doing a lot better with reverse industry days, forums like this, where we can have those interactions.
Describe what you mean by that. Just like meaning like Space Force, PEOs, or program officials going out and saying, I'm going to hit every space business in El Segundo in the next 2 weeks and learn what's happening there.
That'd be great, but I think that's a hard ask, right? Because leadership on that side of the fence has got jobs to do, and discovering, something is on their list. But for them to spend specific time on it, to go to each one of those, industry and commercial entities that do that, or maybe have something is a little difficult. Where they have the open forum where it's in, reverse industry day, you come in, you pitch your wares, you pitch your service, you pitch your whatever. Those are occurring more frequently, and also tied in with that is more creative, I'll say, contracting capabilities, OTAs, et cetera. They've been able to get money to get a product or get a service or to get the initial instantiation of something a lot quicker. I will give the government credit for doing that. More and more frequently, that would be beneficial for everybody to have those conversations.
And that would lead to?
Well, more opportunity to scratch the itch, provide that capability, because now you're pulling that curtain aside, educating the customers, whoever that may be in national security, et cetera, civil.
There's fewer surprises on their end of what those capabilities are.
Exactly, or just, like I said, recognition that, hey, there's somebody out there that can build my better seatbelt, or can, provide images, or whatever. We're using a lot of, euphemisms, so to speak, but sometimes it's just the unknown, to quote a, previous SecDef. What are those things out there that I didn't know? I'm thinking of starting a multi-billion-dollar program to go scratch that itch, and you've already got my 90% solution. Hey, quicker, faster, better.
We've got a couple minutes left. Bob kicked off the question, which I wanted to ask, which is, if we were to come back a year from now and sit on the stage and say, hey, 2026 was a good year, and we know that progress was made because of what? So Brad, how do you know, what does success look like in 2026?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one way to think about that is I think it's important to recognize that what was acceptable, I'll say, a year ago, it is not acceptable now in terms of speed, in terms of the stuff that we thought, when we were sitting here a year ago, what we thought we were aiming for, that target is moved. And I think that's something I expect to be happening for next year too. So I think what it is going to be is it's going to be a constant pressure, as we heard. We can be generations ahead, but if they're innovating 2-3 times as fast as us, they're going to catch us. So I think one of the things we have to realize is just, even if we hit the target that we set last year, we're still behind. If we hit the target we set this year, I think we'll be hopefully less behind. But I think that next year, what we're going to see, I hope, is that we will be making that progress. I think there's going to be a lot of big changes. I think just one that I'll point out is that in 56 days from today, like an hour east from here, NASA will launch for crew around the far side of the moon. And I think that is something, and it is 56 days till the window opens. That's the first attempt. That is going to, I think, start to change some paradigms. Like, that is no kidding. American leadership in space. We're not going back the way we went last time. We're going this time to stay. We're building infrastructure. Those are, for the vernacular of national security folks, those are very high-value assets. We're sending humans out into deep space and bringing them back safely. That, I think, is going to start to create a lot more excitement. I mean, we'll hopefully see a new NASA administrator who's a friend of this community who will be hopefully confirmed next week. I think there's going to be a lot of changes on the civil side that will be easier to talk about. There'll be, I think, a pacing thing for national security space that we'll see that is showing that we are making a difference in our rate of getting after these challenges.
Yeah, that's like the most dual-use technology that I can imagine. Great. Luke, how about you?
Yeah, I think for our lane with the Earth observation side of the house, what we still see is the problem, and there's themes of it and talks about is is how can I get imagery? And that is on our commercial side too. Imagery is great, it will always tell a story, but I don't really care about it because it needs to get down to what is the problem you're solving? That is the real use of Earth observation technology. So if we fast forward a year, I don't want to be talking about like, what's the fastest path to task a satellite? Who cares? Now it's the fastest path about, is the vessel moved? Is the oil and gas levels at the levels they were at? Is it mineral detection? Troop movement? You can detect people don't even know. You can detect Russian camouflage or Chinese PLA helmets with hyperspectral imagery. That is the need we get to, or the solution we have to get to get answers faster to warfighters. We're too focused right now, rightfully so, because there's the bureaucratic nature of imagery. That will be solved. It is being solved. Now it's those answers in the analytics and how do you use AI? And AI is here, it's real. I don't think there's much hype about it. It's going to make everyone better. It's not going to replace a bunch of jobs. I don't think it's going to make everyone better at their jobs, but that is the future I want to see, where it's push a button, get an answer, not push a button, get an image.
Great. Well, this was a treat. Thanks to the panel, and I hope everyone who was in the audience enjoyed this as much as I did. I want to thank the Space Force Association for hosting this conference. Thanks to InnoFlight, this conversation will be available online at spacenews.com as part of the Space Minds podcast. And let's have a round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much, guys.